भगवान भाष्यकार आदि शंकराचार्य कृत उपदेश साहस्री गद्य विभाग प्रकरण 2 कूटस्थाद्वयात्म बोध प्रकरणम. The knowledge of the changeless and non-dual self. सुखमासीनं ब्राह्मणं ब्रह्मनिष्ठं कश्चित् ब्रह्मचारी जन्ममरणलक्षणात् संसारात् निर्विण्ण मुमुक्षुः विधिवदुपसन्नः पप्रच्छ. भगवन् कथमहं संसारान् मोक्षयिष्ये. शरीरेन्द्रियविषयवेदनावान् जागरिते दुःखमनुभवामि तथा स्वप्नेऽनुभवामि पुनः पुनः सुषुप्तिप्रतिपत्त्या विश्रम्य कियमयमेव मम स्वभावः किं वा अन्यस्वभावस्य सतो नैमित्तिक इति. यदि स्वभावः न मे मोक्षाशा स्वभावस्यावर्जनीयत्वात् अथ नैमित्तिकः निमित्तपरिहारे स्यात् मोक्षोपपत्तिः. A certain brahmacharin, tired of the transmigratory existence consisting of birth and death and aspiring after liberation, approached in the prescribed manner a knower of Brahman, established in it and sitting at ease, and said, "How can I, sir, be liberated from this transmigratory existence in the state of waking and also in dream again and again after intervals of rest in deep sleep experienced by me? Is this my own nature or is it causal, I being of a different nature? If it be my own nature, I can have no hope of liberation, as one's own nature cannot be got rid of. But if it be causal, liberation from it may be possible by removing the cause. न तवायम स्वभावः किंतु नैमित्तिकः." The teacher said to him, "Listen, my child, it is not your nature but causal." इति उक्तः शिष्य उवाच, "किं निमित्तं किं वा तस्य निवर्तकं को वा मम स्वभावः यस्मिन् निमित्ते निवर्तिते नैमित्तिका भावः रोगनिमित्तनिवृत्ताविव रोगी स्वभावं प्रपद्येति." Told thus, the disciple said, "What is the cause? What will bring it to an end? And what is my nature? That cause being brought to an end, there will be the absence of the effect, and I shall come by my own nature, just like a patient who gets back the normal condition of his health when the cause of his disease is removed." गुरुरुवाच, "अविद्यानिमित्तं विद्या तस्य निवर्तिका अविद्यायां निवृत्तायां तन्निमित्ताभावात् मोक्षसे जन्ममरणलक्षणात् स्वप्नजाग्रद्दुःखं च नानुभविष्यसीति." The teacher said, "The cause is ignorance. Knowledge brings it to an end. When ignorance, the cause, will be removed, you will be liberated from the transmigratory existence consisting of birth and death. You will never again feel pain in the states of waking and dream." शिष्य उवाच, "का सा अविद्या किं विषया वा विद्या च का यया स्वभावं प्रतिपद्येयेति?" The disciple said, "What is that ignorance? What is its seat? And what is its object? What is knowledge by means of which I may come by my own nature?" गुरुरुवाच, "त्वं परमात्मानं सन्तम् असंसारिणं संसारी अहम् अस्मि इति विपरीतं प्रतिपद्यसे. अकर्तारं सन्तं कर्ता इति अभोक्तारं सन्तं भोक्ता इति विद्यमानं च अविद्यमानिति इयम् अविद्या." The teacher said, "You are the non-transmigratory Supreme Self, but you wrongly think that you are one liable to transmigration. Similarly, not being an agent or an experiencer, you wrongly consider yourself to be so. Again, you are eternal, but mistake yourself to be non-eternal. This is ignorance. शिष्य उवाच यद्यप्यहं विद्यमानः तथापि न परमात्मा कर्तृत्वभोक्तृत्वलक्षणः संसारो मम स्वभावः प्रत्यक्षादिभिः प्रमाणैः अनुभूयमानत्वात् न अविद्यानिमित्तः अविद्यायाः स्वात्मविषयत्वानुपपत्तेः अविद्या नाम अन्यस्मिन् अन्यधर्माध्यारोपणा यथा प्रसिद्धं रजतं प्रसिद्धायां शुक्तिकायां यथा प्रसिद्धं पुरुषं स्थाणावध्यारोपयति प्रसिद्धं वा स्थाणुं पुरुषे न प्रसिद्धं प्रसिद्धे प्रसिद्धं च प्रसिद्धे न चात्मन्यानात्मनमध्यारोपयति आत्मनः अप्रसिद्धत्वात् तथा आत्मानम् अनात्मनि आत्मनो अप्रसिद्धत्वात् एव. The disciple said, though eternal, I am not the Supreme Self. My nature is one of transmigratory existence consisting of agency and experiencing of its results as it is known by evidences such as sense perception, etc. It is not due to ignorance, for it cannot have the innermost self for its object. Ignorance consists of the superimposition of the qualities of one thing on another, that is well-known silver on well-known mother of pearl, or a well-known human being on a well-known trunk of a tree, and vice versa. An unknown thing cannot be superimposed on a known one, and vice versa. The non-self cannot be superimposed on the self which is not known. Similarly, the self cannot be superimposed on the non-self for the very same reason. तं गुरुर्वाच न व्यभिचारात् न हि वत्स प्रसिद्धं प्रसिद्धेवाध्यारोपयति ते नियन्तुं शक्यम् आत्मन्यध्यारोपणदर्शनात् गौरवहं कृष्णोऽहम् इति देहधर्मस्य अहं प्रत्ययविषये आत्मनि अहं प्रत्ययविषयस्य च आत्मनः देहे अयमस्मीति. The teacher said to him, it is not so. There are exceptions. For my child, there cannot be a rule that it is only well-known things that are superimposed on other well-known things. For we meet with the superimposition of certain things on the self. Fairness and blackness, the properties of the body, are superimposed on the self, which is the object of the consciousness I, and the same self is superimposed on the body. शिष्याः प्रसिद्ध एव तर्ह्यात्मा अहं प्रत्ययविषयतया देहश्च अयमिति तत्रैवं सति प्रसिद्धयोरेव देहात्मनोरितरेतराध्यारोपणात् स्थाणुपुरुषयोः शुक्तिकारजतयोरिव तत्र कं विशेषमाश्रित्य भगवतोक्तं प्रसिद्धयोरितरेतराध्यारोपणेति नियन्तुं न शक्यते इति. The disciple said, in that case the self must be well known owing to its being the object of the consciousness I. The body also must be well known, for it is spoken of as this body. When this is so, it is a case of mutual superimposition of the well-known body and the well-known self, like that of a human being and a trunk of a tree, or that of silver and mother of pearl. There is therefore no exception here. So what is the peculiarity with reference to which you said that there could not be a rule that mutual superimposition are possible of two well-known things only? गुरुराह शृणु सत्यं प्रसिद्धौ देहात्मानौ न तु स्थाणुपुरुषाविव विविक्तप्रत्ययविषयतया सर्वलोकप्रसिद्धौ कथं तर्हि नित्यमेव निरन्तरा विविक्तप्रत्ययविषयतया न हि अयं देहः अयमात्मा इति विविक्ताभ्यां प्रत्ययाभ्यां देहात्मानौ गृह्णाति यतः कश्चित् अत एव हि मोमुह्यते लोकः आत्मानात्मविषये एवमात्मा नैवमात्मा इति। इमं विशेषमाश्रित्यावोचं नैवं नियन्तुं शक्यमिति. The teacher said, listen, it is true that the self and the body are well known, but they are not well known to all people to be objects of different knowledges, like a human being and a trunk of a tree. Question. How are they known then? Reply. They are always known to be the object of an undifferentiated knowledge, for no one knows them to be the objects of different knowledges, saying, this is the body and this is the self. It is for this reason that people are deluded about the nature of the self and of the not self, and say, the self is of this nature and it is not of this nature. It was this peculiarity with reference to which I said that there was no such rule, namely only well-known things could be superimposed on each other. ननु अविद्याध्यारोपितं यत्र यत् तदसत् तत्र दृष्टं, यथा रजतं शुक्तिकायां स्थाणो पुरुषः, रज्वां सर्पः, आकाशे तलमलिनत्वम् इत्यादि, तथा देहात्मनोरपि नित्यमेव निरन्तरा विविक्तप्रत्ययतया इतरेतराध्यारोपणा कृता स्यात्, तदितरेतरयोः नित्यमेव असत्वं स्यात्. यथा शुक्तिकादिषु अविद्याध्यारोपितानां रजतादीनां नित्यमेव अत्यन्तासत्वं, तद्विपरीतानां च विपरीतेषु तद्वत् देहात्मनोरविद्ययैव इतरेतराध्यारोपणा कृता स्यात्. तत्रैवं सति देहात्मनोरसत्वं प्रसज्येत. तच्चानिष्टं वैनाशिकपक्षत्वात्. अथ तद्विपर्ययेण देह आत्मनि अविद्ययाध्यारोपितदेहस्यात्मनि सति असत्वं प्रसज्येत. तच्चानिष्टं प्रत्यक्षादिविरोधात्. तस्मात् देहात्मानो नाविद्यया इतरेतरस्मिन् अध्यारोपितौ कथं तर्हि वंशस्तम्भवन्नित्यसंयुक्तौ. Disciple said, whatever is superimposed through ignorance on anything else is found to be non-existent in that thing. Example, silver in mother of pearl, a human being in the trunk of a tree, a snake in a rope, and a form of a frying pan and blueness in the sky. Similarly, both the body and the self, always the objects of an undifferentiated knowledge, would be non-existent in each other if they were mutually superimposed. Just as silver, etc., superimposed on mother of pearl and other things, and vice versa, are always absolutely non-existent. Likewise, the self and the not self would both be non-existent if they were similarly superimposed on each other through ignorance. But that is not desirable, as it is the position of the nihilists. If instead of a mutual superimposition, the body alone is superimposed through ignorance on the self, the body will be non-existent in the existing self. That is also not desirable, for it contradicts sense perception, etc. Therefore, the body and the self are not mutually superimposed due to ignorance. If they are not superimposed, what then? They are always in the relation of conjunction with each other, like pillars and bamboos. न अनित्यत्व परार्थत्व प्रसंगात् संहतत्वात् परार्थत्वम् अनित्यत्वं च वंशस्तंभादिवदेव. किंच यस्तु परैर्देहेन संहतः कल्पित आत्मा स संहतत्वात् परार्थः, तेन असंहतः परोऽन्यो नित्यसिद्धस्तावत्. Teacher said, it is not so, for in that case there arises the possibility of the self existing for the benefit of other and being non-eternal. The self, if in contact with the body, would be existing for the benefit of another and be non eternal like the combination of pillars and bamboos. Moreover, the self superimposed by other philosophers to be conjoined with the body must have an existence for the sake of another. It is therefore concluded that devoid of contact with the body, the self is eternal and characteristically different from it. तस्या संहतस्य देहे देहमात्रतया अध्यारोपितत्वेन असत्त्वानित्यादि दोषप्रसङ्गो भवति तत्र निरात्मको देह इति वैनाशिकपक्षप्राप्तिदोषः स्यात्. Disciple said, the objections that the self as the body only is non-existent and so on holds good if the self which is not conjoined with the body were superimposed on it. For being superimposed, the self is non-existent. The relation of conjunction between the self and the body is not admitted by the teacher. The relation of conjunction failing, that of false identity, comes in, for we must explain the idea I am a man. The body would then be without a self, and so the nihilist position comes in. The body again is superimposed on the self according to the teacher, and the self would be without a body. न स्वत एव आत्मन आकाशस्येव असंहतत्वाभ्युपगमात् सर्वेणा संहतः स च आत्मेति न निरात्मको देहादि सर्वस्यात् यथा च आकाशं सर्वेणा संहतमिति सर्वं न निराकाशं भवति एवं तस्मान् न वैनाशिकपक्षप्राप्ति दोषः स्यात्. Teacher said, no, you are not right, for we admit that like the ether, the self is by nature free from contact with anything, just as things are not bereft of the ether, though it is not in contact with them. So the body, etc., are not devoid of the self, though it is not in contact with them. Therefore, the objection of the nihilist position coming in does not arise. यत् पुनरुक्तं देहस्यात्यन्ता सत्वे प्रत्यक्षादिविरोधस्यादिति तन्न प्रत्यक्षादिभिः आत्मनि देहस्य सत्त्वानुपलब्धेः नैहात्मनि कुण्डे बदरं क्षीरे सर्पि तिले तैलं भित्तौ चित्रमिव च प्रत्यक्षादिभिः देह उपलभ्यते तस्मान् न प्रत्यक्षादि विरोधः. It is not a fact that the absolute non-existence of the body contradicts sense perception, etc. Inasmuch as the existence of the body in the self is not known by these evidences, the body is not known to exist in the self by perception, etc. Like a plum in a hole, ghee in milk, oil in sesame, or a picture painted on a wall. There is therefore no contradiction to sense perception, etc. कथं तर्हि प्रत्यक्षाद्य प्रसिद्धात्मनि देहाध्यारोपणा देहे च आत्मरोपणा. Disciple said, how can then there be the superimposition of the body, etc., on the self which is not known by sense perception, etc., and that of the self on the body? नायं दोषः स्वभावप्रसिद्धत्वादात्मनः न हि कादाचित्कत्व सिद्धावेव अध्यारोपणा न नित्यसिद्धौ इति नियन्तुं शक्यम् आकाशे तलमलाद्यध्यारोपणदर्शनात्. Teacher said, it is not a valid objection, for the self is naturally well known. As we see the form of a frying pan and blueness superimposed on the sky, there cannot be a rule that it is things known occasionally only on which superimposition is possible and not on things always known. That is the self. Example the self. किं भगवन् देहात्मनो इतरेतराध्यारोपणा देहादि संघातकृता अथवा आत्मकृतेति? Disciple said, Sir, is the mutual superimposition of the body and the self made by the combination of the body etc. or by the self? Guru Ruvacha, यदि देहादि संघातकृता यदि वा आत्मकृता किं तत्र स्यात्? The teacher said, Does it matter if it be made by the one or the other? इत्युक्तः शिष्याः यद्यहं देहादि संघातमात्र ततो मम चेतनत्वात् परार्थत्वमिति न मत्कृता देहात्मनोः इतरेतराध्यारोपणम् अथाहमात्मा परोऽन्यसंघातात् चित्तमत्वात् स्वार्थ इति मयैव चित्तिमत्ता आत्मनि अध्यारोपणा क्रियते सर्वानर्थबीजभूता. Questioned thus, the disciple said, If I were only a combination of the body etc., I would be non-conscious and would exist for the sake of another only. Therefore, the mutual superimposition of the body and the self would not be made by me. If, on the other hand, I were the self, I would be characteristically different from the combination of the body, etc., would be conscious and therefore would exist entirely on myself. So it is I, a conscious being, who make that superimposition, the root of all evils on the self. इत्युक्तो गुरुरुवाच अनर्थबीजभूतां चेत् मिथ्याध्यारोपणां जानीषे मा कार्षेस्तर्हि. Thus told, the teacher said, Do not make any superimposition if you know it to be the root of all evils. Give it up. Know that you are pure consciousness and never really identified with the body etc. नैव भगवान् शक्नोमि न कर्तुम् अन्येन केनचित् प्रयुक्तोऽहं न स्वतन्त्र इति. Disciple said, Sir, I cannot but make it. I am not independent. I am made to act by someone else. न तर्हि अचिति मत्वात् स्वार्थत्वं येन प्रयुक्तः अस्वतन्त्रः प्रवर्तसे स चितिमान् स्वार्थः संघात एव त्वम्. Teacher said, Then you do not exist for yourself, as you are non-conscious, that by which you are made to act like one dependent on another is conscious and exists for itself. You are only a combination of the body and other things. यद्य चेतनोऽहं कथं सुखदुःखवेदनां भवदुक्तं च जानामि. Disciple said, How am I conscious of pain and pleasure and also of what you say if I be non-conscious? Guru Ruvacha किं सुखदुःखवेदनाया मदुक्ताच्चन्यस्त्वं किं वा अनन्या एवेति. Teacher said, Are you different from the consciousness of pain and pleasure and from what I say or not? Shishya Uvacha Naham tavadanyah Kasmat यस्मात् तदुभयं कर्मभूतं घटादिकमिव जानामि. यद्यनन्योऽहं तेन तदुभयं न जानीयाम् किन्तु जानामि तस्मादन्यः सुखदुःखवेदना विक्रिया च स्वार्थैव प्राप्नोति. त्वदुक्तं च स्यात् अनन्यत्वे न च तयोः स्वार्थता युक्ता. न हि चन्दनकण्टककृते सुखदुःखे चन्दनकण्टकार्थे घटोपयोगो वा घटार्थः. तस्मात् तद्विज्ञातुर्मम चन्दनादि कृतार्थः. अहं हि ततोऽन्यसमस्तमर्थं जानामि बुद्ध्यारूढम्. The disciple said, It is not a fact that I am not different from them, For I know them to be objects of my knowledge, like jars and other things. If I were not different, I could not know them, but I know them, so I am different. If I were not different, the modifications of the mind called pain and pleasure and the words spoken by you would exist for themselves. But that is not reasonable. For pleasure and pain produced by sandal paste and a thorn, respectively, and also the use of a jar, are not for their own sake. Therefore, the purposes served by sandal paste, etc., are for the sake of me, who am their knower. I am different from them, as I know all things pervaded by the intellect. तं गुरुरुवाच एवं तर्हि स्वार्थस्त्वं चितिमत्वान्न परेण प्रयुज्यसे न हि चितिमान् परतन्त्रः परेण प्रयुज्यते चितिमत्तश्चितिमद्ददर्थत्वानुपपत्तेः समत्वात् प्रदीपप्रकाशयोरिव नापि अचितिमदर्थत्वं चितिमतो भवति अचितिमतो चितिमत्वादेव स्वार्थसम्बन्धानुपपत्तेः नापि अचितिमतो अन्योन्यार्थत्वं दृष्टं न हि काष्ठकुड्ये अन्योन्यार्थं कुर्वाते. The teacher said to him, as you are possessed of consciousness, you exist for yourself and are not made to act by anyone else. For an independent consciousness being is not made to act by another, as it is not reasonable that one possessed of consciousness exists for the sake of another possessing consciousness, both being of the same nature, like the lights of two lamps. Nor does one possessed of consciousness exist for the sake of another having no consciousness, for it is not possible that a thing exists for itself for the very fact that it is non consciousness. Nor again it is seen that two non conscious things exist for each other, as wood and wall do not serve each other's purpose. ननु चितिमत्वे समेपि भृत्यसामिनोः अन्योन्यार्थत्वं दृष्टम्. Disciple said, but it may be said that the servant and the master are seen to serve each other's purpose, though they are equally possessed of consciousness. नैवम् अग्निरुष्णप्रकाशवत् तव चितिमत्वस्य विवक्षितत्वात् प्रदर्शितश्च दृष्टान्तः प्रदीपप्रकाशयोरिति. तत्रैवं सति स्वबुद्ध्यारूढमेव सर्वमुपलभसे अग्निष्णप्रकाशतुल्येन कूटस्थनित्यचैतन्यस्वरूपेण. यदि चैवम् आत्मनः सर्वदा निर्विशेषत्वमुपगच्छसि किमित्यूचिवान् सुषुप्ते विश्रम्य विश्रम्य जाग्रत्स्वप्नयोः दुःखमनुभवामि इति. किम् अयमेव मम स्वभावः किं वा नैमित्तिकः इति. किमसौ व्यामोहोपगतः किं वा नेति. Teacher said, it is not so, for the non-conscious portion is in each is of service to the conscious portion in the other. For I speak of consciousness belonging to you, like heat and light of fire. It is for this reason that I cited the example of the lights of two lamps. Therefore, as changeless and eternal consciousness, like the heat and light of fire, you know everything. Superimposed on you, changeless, pure consciousness, presented to your intellect. Thus, when you always know the self to be without any attribute, why did you say, I experience pain and pleasure again and again during the states of waking and dream, after intervals of rest in deep sleep? And why did you say, is it my own nature or causal? Has this delusion vanished or not? इत्युक्तशिष्य आह भगवन् अपगतस्त्वत्प्रसादात् व्यामोहः किन्तु मम कूटस्थतायां संशयः कथं शब्दादीनां स्वतःसिद्धिर्नास्ति अचेतनत्वात् शब्दाद्याकारप्रत्ययोत्पत्तेस्तु तेषां विशेषणानां नीलपीताद्याकारवतां स्वतःसिद्ध्यः सम्भवात् तस्मात् बाह्याकारनिमित्तत्वं गम्यते इति बाह्याकारवत् शब्दाद्याकारत्वसिद्धिः तथा प्रत्ययानामपि अहं प्रत्ययालम्बनवस्तुभेदानां संहतत्वात् अचैतन्योपपत्तेः स्वार्थत्वात् संभवात् स्वरूपव्यतिरिक्तग्राह्यत्वेन सिद्धिः शब्दादिवदेव असंहतत्वे सति चैतन्यात्मकत्वात् स्वार्थोऽपि अहं प्रत्ययानां नीलपीताद्याकाराणामुपलब्धेः विक्रियावानेव कूटस्थ इति संशयः. To this the disciple replied, "The delusion, sir, is gone by your grace, but I have doubts about the changeless nature which you say pertains to me. I am liable to transmigration and misery and other than the Lord who is ever free." Teacher asked, "What doubts?" Disciple said, "Sound etc. do not exist independently as they are non-conscious, but they come into existence when there arises in the mind modifications resembling sound and so on. It is impossible that these modifications should have an independent existence, as they are exclusive of one another as regards their special characteristics of resembling sound etc. and appear to be blue, yellow etc. So sound etc. are not the same as mental modifications. Sound, touch, sight, taste and smell. There is a refutation of the idealists. Sound consciousness, touch consciousness, color consciousness etc. It is only pure consciousness that has an independent existence. It is therefore inferred that these modifications are caused by external objects. So it is proved that modifications resemble sound etc. objects existing externally. Similarly, like sound etc., these different modifications of the mind also are combinations and therefore non-conscious. So not existing for their own sake, they, like sound etc., exist only when known by one different from them, the self. Though the self is not a combination, consists of consciousness and exists for its own sake, it is the knower of the mental modifications appearing to be blue, yellow and so on. The disciple means the agent of the action of knowing the modifications. It must therefore be of a changeful nature. Hence is the doubt about the changeless nature of the self. तं गुरुरुवाच न युक्तस्तव संशयः यतस्तेषां प्रत्ययानां नियमेन अशेषतः उपलब्धेरेव अपरिणामित्वात् कूटस्थत्वसिद्धौ निश्चयहेतुमेव अशेष चित्तप्रचारोपलब्धिं संशयहेतुमात्थ. यदि हि तव परिणामित्वं स्यात् अशेष स्वविषय चित्तप्रचारोपलब्धिर्न स्यात् चित्तस्यैव स्वविषये यथा चेन्द्रियाणां स्वविषयेषु न च तथात्मनस्तव स्वविषयैकदेशोपलब्धिः अतः कूटस्थतैव तवेति. The teacher said to him, "Your doubt is not justifiable. For you, the self are proved to be free from change and therefore perpetually the same on the ground that all the modifications of the mind, without a single exception, are simultaneously known by you. You regard this knowledge of all the modifications, which is the reason for the above inference, as that for your doubt. If you were changeful like the mind or the senses which pervade their objects one after another, you would not simultaneously know all the mental modifications, the objects of your knowledge, nor are you aware of the portion only of the objects of your knowledge at a time. You are therefore absolutely changeless." तत्राह उपलब्धिर्नाम धात्वर्थो विक्रिया इव उपलब्धो कूटस्थात्मता चेति विरुद्धम. The disciple said, "Knowledge is the meaning of a route to know, and therefore surely consists of a change. For every route means an action, and the knower, the disciple, means the agent of the action of knowing, as you say, is of a changeless nature. This is a contradiction." न धात्वर्थ विक्रियायाम् उपलब्ध्युपचारात् यो हि बौद्धः प्रत्ययः स धात्वर्थो विक्रियात्मक आत्मनः उपलब्ध्याभासफलावसान इति उपलब्धिशब्देन उपचर्यते. यथा छिदिक्रिया द्वैधीभावफलावसानेति धात्वर्थतेन उपचर्यते तद्वत्. Teacher said, "It is not so, for the word knowledge is used only in a secondary sense to mean a change called an action, the meaning of a route. A modification of the intellect called an action ends in a result in itself, which is the reflection of knowledge, the self. It is for this reason that this modification is called knowledge in a secondary sense, just as the action of cutting a thing, producing and including the ultimate result, namely its separation in two parts, is secondarily called the meaning of the route to cut." इत्युक्त शिष्य आह, "ननु भगवन् मम कूटस्थत्व प्रतिपादनं प्रति असमर्थो दृष्टान्तः कथं छिदिच्छेद्य विक्रियावसाना उपचर्यते यथा धात्वर्थत्वेन तथा उपलब्धि शब्दोपचरितोऽपि धात्वर्थो बौद्धप्रत्ययः आत्मन उपलब्धि विक्रियावसानश्चेत् नात्मनः कूटस्थतां प्रतिपादयितुं समर्थः." Told thus, the disciple said, "Sir, the example cited by you cannot prove that I am changeless." Teacher said, "How?" Disciple said, "For just as the action of cutting, producing and including the ultimate change in the thing to be cut is secondarily called the meaning of the route to cut, so the word knowledge is used secondarily for the mental modification, which is the meaning of the route to know, and which ends in the result, that is a change in knowledge, the self. The example cited by you cannot therefore establish the changeless nature of the self." गुरुरुवाच सत्यमेवं स्यात् यदि उपलब्ध्योः विशेषः नित्योपलब्धि मात्र एव हि उपलब्धा न तु तार्किकसमय इव अन्य उपलब्धा च. The teacher said, what you say would be true if there were a distinction existing between the knower and knowledge. For the knower is eternal knowledge only, is pure knowledge. The knower and knowledge are not different as they are in the argumentative philosophy, the philosophy of Naiyayikas. ननु उपलब्धि फलावसानो धात्वर्थ कथमिति. Disciple asked, how is then that an action ends in a result which is knowledge? For example, for knowledge is so spoken of as eternal in the previous paragraph, a result cannot, of course, be eternal. उच्यते शृणु उपलब्ध्याभासफलावसाने इत्युक्तं किं न श्रुतं तत्त्वया न तु आत्मा विक्रियोत्पादनावसाने इति मयोक्तम्. The teacher said, listen, it was said that the mental modification called an action ended in a result which was the reflection of knowledge. Did you not hear it? I did not say that a change was produced in the self as a result of the modification of the mind. I did not say that a modification ended in a result that was knowledge, the self. शिष्य उवाच कथं तर्हि कूटस्थे मयि अशेष स्वविषय चित्तप्रचारोपलब्धृत्वमित्यार्थ. The disciple said, how then am I, who am changeless, the knower, as you say, of all the mental modifications, the objects of my knowledge? The Guru Ruvacha Satyamavocam Tenaiva Kutasthatamabhruvam Tava. The teacher said to him, I told you the right thing. The very fact that you know simultaneously all the mental modifications was adduced by me as the reason why you are eternally immutable. यद्येवं भगवन् कूटस्थ नित्योपलब्धि स्वरूपे मयि शब्दाद्याकार बौद्ध प्रत्ययेषु च मत्स्वरूपोपलब्ध्या भासफलावसानवत्सु उत्पद्यमानेषु कस्त्वपराधो मम. Disciple said, if this is so, sir, what is my fault when the mental changes resembling sound, etc., and resulting in the reflection of knowledge, my own nature, are produced in me, who am of the nature of changeless and eternal consciousness. सत्यं नास्त्यपराधः किन्तु अविद्यामात्रस्तु अपराधः इति प्रागेवावोचम्. Teacher said, it is true that you are not to be blamed. Ignorance, as I told you before, is the only fault. Knowledge means pure consciousness. यदि भगवान सुषुप्त इव मम विक्रिया नास्ति कथं स्वप्न जागरिते. Disciple said, sir, why are there the states of dream and waking in me if I am absolutely changeless like one in deep sleep? Tam Gururuvacha kintu anubhuyete tvaya satatam. The teacher said to him, but you always experience them whenever they arise. बाढ़म अनुभवामि किंतु विच्छिद्य न तो संततम. Disciple said, yes, I experience them at intervals but not continuously. तं गुरुर्वाच तर्हि आगन्तुके त्वेते न तवात्मभूते यदि तवात्मभूते चैतन्यस्वरूपवत् स्वतःसिद्धे सन्तते एव स्याताम् किञ्च स्वप्नजागरिते न तव आत्मभूते व्यभिचारित्वात् वस्त्रादिवत् न हि यस्य यत्स्वरूपं तद्व्यभिचारे दृष्टं स्वप्नजागरिते तु चैतन्यमात्रत्वात् व्यभिचरतः सुषुप्ते चेत् स्वरूपं व्यभिचरेत् तन्नष्टं नास्तीति वा बाध्यमेव स्यात् आगन्तुकानाम् अतद्धर्माणाम् उभयात्मकत्वदर्शनात् यथा धनवस्त्रादीनां नाशो दृष्टः स्वप्नभ्रान्तिलब्धानां तु अभावो दृष्टः. The teacher said, they are then adventitious only and are not your own nature. They would surely be continuous and hence would always be experienced by you if they were self-existent like pure consciousness, which is your own nature. Moreover, they are not your own nature inasmuch as they are non-persistent like clothes and other things. For what is one's own nature is never seen to cease to persist while one is persisting. But waking and dreams cease to persist while pure consciousness continues to do so. Pure consciousness, the self, persisting in deep sleep, whatever is non persistent at that time, is either destroyed. In both these cases, they cannot be regarded as really belonging to the self, or negated inasmuch as adventitious things, never the properties of one's own nature, are found to possess these characteristics. For example, the destruction of money, clothes, etc., and the negation of things acquired in dream or delusion are seen. नन्वेवं भगवन् चैतन्यस्वरूपमपि आगन्तुकं प्राप्तं स्वप्नजागरितयोरिव सुषुप्ते अनुपलब्धेः अचैतन्यस्वरूपो वा स्यामहम्. Disciple said, but sir, when this is so, pure consciousness itself has to be admitted. The ideas I am a seer, I am a hearer, etc., showing consciousness in one in dream and waking are absent in deep sleep together. My consciousness is also not there. Itself has to be admitted to the adventitious like waking and dream, for it is not known in deep sleep. Or it may be that I have adventitious consciousness or I am non-conscious by nature. न पश्य तदनुपपत्तेः चैतन्यस्वरूपं चेत् आगन्तुकं पश्य तैतद्वर्षशतेनापि उपपत्त्या कलयितुं शक्नुमो वयम् अन्यो वा चैतन्योऽपि संहतत्वात् पारार्थ्यम् अनेकत्वं नाशित्वं च न केनचित् उपपत्त्या वारयितुं शक्यम् अस्वार्थस्य स्वतःसिद्ध्यभावादित्यवोचाम् चैतन्यस्वरूपस्य तु आत्मनः स्वतःसिद्धे अन्यानपेक्षत्वं च न केनचित् वारयितुं शक्यम् अव्यभिचारात्. Teacher said, no, what you say is not right. Think over it. It is not reasonable to say so. You may look upon pure consciousness as adventitious if you are wise enough, but we cannot prove it to be so by reasoning even in 100 years, nor can it be proved to be so even by a dull man. That is, no one can be so dull as to prove it to be so. As the consciousness that has for its adjuncts mental modifications is a combination, no one can disprove its existence for the sake of another, its manyness and destructibility by any reasoning whatever. For we have already said that whatsoever does not exist for itself is not self existent. As pure consciousness, the self is self existent. No one can disprove its independence or other things inasmuch as it never ceases to exist. ननु व्यभिचारो दर्शितो मया सुषुप्ते न पश्यामि इति. Disciple said, but I have shown an exception to the persistence of pure consciousness, namely, I have no consciousness in deep sleep. न व्याहतत्वात् कथं व्याघातः पश्यतस्तव न पश्यामि इति व्याहतं वचनम्. न हि कदाचित् भगवन् सुषुप्ते मया चैतन्यम् अन्यद्वा किञ्चित् दृष्टं पश्यन् तर्हि सुषुप्ते त्वां यस्मात् दृष्टमेव प्रतिषेधसि न दृष्टिं या तव दृष्टिः तच्चैतन्यमिति मयोक्तं यया त्वं विद्यमानया न किञ्चित् दृष्टमिति प्रतिषेधसि सा दृष्टिः त्वच्चैतन्यम्. तर्हि सर्वत्र अव्यभिचारात् कूटस्थनित्यत्वं सिद्धं स्वतः एव न प्रमाणापेक्षं. स्वतःसिद्धस्य हि प्रमातुः अन्यस्य प्रमेयस्य परिच्छित्तिं प्रति प्रमाणापेक्षा. या तु अन्या नित्या परिच्छित्तिः अपेक्षते अन्यस्य अपरिच्छित्तिरूपस्य परिच्छेदाय सा हि नित्यैव कूटस्था स्वयं ज्योतिस्वभावा. आत्मनि प्रमाणत्वे प्रमातृत्वे वा न तां प्रति प्रमाणापेक्षा तत्स्वभावत्वात्. यथा प्रकाशनम् उष्णत्वं वा लोहोदकादिषु परतः अपेक्षते अग्न्यादित्यादिभ्यः अतस्त्वभावत्वात् न अग्न्यादित्यादीनां तदपेक्षा सर्वदा तत्स्वभावत्वात्. Teacher said, no, you contradict yourself. Disciple said, how is it a contradiction? Teacher said, you contradict yourself by saying that you are not conscious when, as a matter of fact, you are so. Disciple said, but sir, I was never conscious of consciousness or anything else in deep sleep. Teacher said, you are then conscious in deep sleep, for you deny the existence of the object of knowledge in that state, but not that of knowledge. I have told you that what is your consciousness is nothing but absolute knowledge. The consciousness owing to whose presence you deny the existence of things in deep sleep by saying, I was consciousness of nothing, is the knowledge, the consciousness which is yourself, as it never ceases to exist. Its eternal immutability is self-evident and does not depend on any evidence, for an object of knowledge different from the self-evident knower depends on an evidence in order to be known. Other than the object or the eternal knowledge that is indispensable in proving non-conscious things different from itself is immutable, for it is always of a self-evident nature, just as iron, water, etc., which are not of the nature of light and heat, depend on them, on the sun, fire, and other things other than themselves. But the sun and fire themselves, always of the nature of light and heat, do not depend for them on anything else. So, being of the nature of pure knowledge, it does not depend on the evidence to prove that it exists or that it is the knower. अनित्यत्वे एव प्रमा स्यात् न नित्यत्वे इति चेत्. Disciple said, but it is transitory knowledge only that is the result. True knowledge is due to sense perception, inference, testimony, etc. When we see a jar, for example, with our eyes, we have what is called the true knowledge of the jar. It is produced and therefore transitory. That is what the disciple thinks. Of a proof and not eternal knowledge. न अवगतेः नित्यत्वानित्यत्वयोः विशेषानुपपत्तेः न हि अवगतेः प्रमात्वे अनित्या अवगति प्रमा न नित्या इति विशेषः अवगम्यते. Teacher said, no, there cannot reasonably be a distinction of perpetuity or otherwise in knowledge, for it is not known that transitory knowledge is the result of a proof and not eternal knowledge, as knowledge itself is such a result. Pure knowledge, which is the self, pure knowledge itself. नित्यायाः प्रमातु अपेक्षा भावः अनित्यायां तु यंत्रांतरितत्वात् अवगति अपेक्षते इति विशेषः स्यादिति चेत्. Disciple asks, but eternal knowledge does not depend on the knower, while transitory knowledge does so, as it is produced by an intervening effort. This is the difference. One who applies a proof between knowledge eternal and transitory. सिद्धादर्हि आत्मनः प्रमातो स्वतः सिद्धि प्रमाण निरपेक्षतयैवेति. Teacher said, the knower which is the self is then self-evident, as it does not depend on any evidence in order to be proved. Eternal knowledge. अभावेपि अपेक्षा भावः नित्यत्वात् इति चेत् न अवगतेरेव आत्मनि सद्भावादिति परिवृतमेतत्. Disciple said, if the knowledge of the self be independent of an evidence on the ground that it is eternal, why should the absence of the result of an evidence with regard to the self be not so on the same ground? The disciple thinks that the self does not exist, as it is not known by the evidence. Teacher said, no, it has been refuted on the ground that it is pure knowledge that is in the self. The true knowledge, that is the self, is of the nature of pure knowledge, and so it exists independent of every evidence. प्रमातुश्चेत् प्रमाणापेक्षा सिद्धि कस्य प्रमित्सा स्यात् यस्य प्रमित्सा स एव प्रमाता अभ्युपगम्यते. तदीया च प्रमित्सा प्रमेयविषयैव न प्रमातृ विषया. प्रमातृ विषयत्वे अनवस्थाप्रसंगात् प्रमातुः तदिच्छायाश्च तस्याप्यन्नः प्रमाता तस्याप्यन्न इति. एवमेव इच्छायाः प्रमातृ विषयत्वे प्रमातुरात्मनः अव्यवहितत्वाच्च प्रमेयत्वानुपपत्तिः. लोके हि प्रमेयं नाम प्रमातो इच्छा स्मृति प्रयत्न प्रमाण जन्म व्यवहितं सिद्ध्यति नान्यथा अवगति प्रमेय विषया दृष्टा न च प्रमातुः प्रमाता स्वस्य स्वयमेव केनचित् व्यवहितः कल्पयितुं शक्य इच्छादीनामन्यतमेनापि स्मृतिश्च स्मर्तव्य विषया न स्मर्तृविषया तथा इच्छायाः इष्टविषयत्वमेव न इच्छावत् विषयत्वं स्मर्तृच्छावत् विषयत्वेऽपि हि उभयो अनवस्था पूर्ववत् अपरिहार्या स्यात्. Whom will the desire to know a thing belong to if the knower depends on an evidence in order to be known? It is admitted that one who is desirous of knowing a thing is the knower. His desire of knowing a thing has for its object the thing to be known and not the knower. For in the latter case there arises a regressus ad infinitum with regard to the knower and also with regard to the desire to know the knower, inasmuch as the knower of the knower and so on are to be known, and such is the case with regard to the desire of knowing the knower. Moreover, there being nothing intervening, the knower, the self, cannot fall into the category of the known. For a thing to be known becomes known when it is distanced from the knower by the birth of an intervening desire, memory, effort, or an evidence on the part of the knower. That is, a thing to be known is distanced by the birth of an evidence before it is known. A thing to be desired is distanced by the birth of a desire before it is desired. A thing to be remembered is distanced by the birth of a memory before it is remembered. And a thing to be accomplished is distanced by an effort before it is accomplished. There cannot be the knowledge of an object in any other way. Again, it cannot be imagined that the knower himself is distanced from himself by anyone of his own desire, etc. For memory has for its object the thing to be remembered and not one who remembers it. So has desire for its object the thing to be desired and not one who desires it. There arises, as before, an inevitable regressus ad infinitum. If memory and desire have their own agents for their objects, nanu प्रमातृ विषयावगत्यनुत्पत्तौ अनवगत एव प्रमाता स्यादिति चेत्. Disciple asked, but the knower remains unknown if there is no knowledge which has for its object the knower. न अवगन्तुः अवगतेः अवगन्तव्य विषयत्वात् अवगन्तृ विषयत्वे च अनवस्था पूर्ववत् स्यात्. अवगतिश्च आत्मनि कूटस्थ नित्यात्मज्योतिः अन्यतः अनपेक्षैव सिद्धा अग्न्यादित्यादुष्णप्रकाशवत् इति पूर्वमेव प्रसादितम्. अवगतेः चैतन्यात्मज्योतिषस्वात्मनि अनित्यत्वे आत्मनः स्वार्थतानुपपत्तिः कार्यकारणसङ्घातवत् संहतत्वात् पारार्थ्यं दोषवत्वं च अवोचाम. कथं चैतन्यात्मज्योतिषस्वात्मनि अनित्यत्वे स्मृत्यादि व्यवधानात् सान्तरत्वम्. ततश्च तस्य चैतन्यज्योतिषी प्रागुत्पत्तेः प्रध्वंसाच्चोर्ध्वम् आत्मन्येव अभावात् चक्षुरादीनामिव संहतत्वात् पारार्थ्यं स्यात्. यदा च तत् उत्पन्नम् आत्मनि विद्यते न तदा आत्मनः स्वार्थत्वं भावापेक्षा हि आत्मानात्मनोः परार्थत्वसिद्धिः। तस्मात् आत्मनः अन्यनिरपेक्षमेव नित्यचैतन्यज्योतिष्त्वं सिद्धम्. Teacher said, no, the knowledge of the knower has for its object the thing to be known. If it have for its object the knower, there arises a regressus ad infinitum. As before, it has already been shown that like the heat and light of the sun, fire and other things, the knowledge which is changeless, eternal and self-evident has an existence in the self entirely independent of everything else. I have already said that if the self-effulgent knowledge which is there in the self were transitory and therefore producible, it would become unreasonable that the self existed for itself, and being a combination, it would get impurities and have an existence for the sake of another, like the combination of the body and the senses. How? Reply: if the self-effulgent knowledge in the self were transitory, it would have a distance by the intervention of memory, etc. It would then be non-existent in the self before being produced and after being destroyed, and the self, then a combination, would have an existence for the sake of another, like that of the eye, etc., produced by the combination of certain things. The self would have no independent existence if this knowledge were produced before it was in it. For it is only on account of the absence or presence of the state of being combined that the self is known to exist for itself and the non-self for another. It is therefore established that the self is of the nature of eternal and self-effulgent knowledge, not dependent on anything else. ननु एवं सति असति प्रमाश्रयत्वे कथं प्रमातुः प्रमातृत्वम्. Disciple asked, how can the knower be a knower if it is not the seat of the knowledge produced by evidences? Uchyate प्रमायाः नित्यत्वे अनित्यत्वे च रूपविशेषाभावात् अवगतिर्हि प्रमा. तस्या स्मृतेच्छादिपूर्विकायाः अनित्यायाः कूटस्थनित्याया वा न स्वरूपाविशेषो विद्यते, यथा धात्वर्थस्य तिष्ठत्यादेः फलस्य गत्यादिपूर्वकस्य अनित्यस्य अपूर्वस्य नित्यस्य वा रूपविशेषो नास्ति. तुल्यो व्यपदेशो दृष्टः तिष्ठन्ति मनुष्याः, तिष्ठन्ति पर्वताः इत्यादि. तथा नित्यावगते स्वरूपेपि प्रमातरि प्रमातृत्व व्यपदेशो न विरुध्यते फलसामान्यात् इति. The teacher said, the knowledge, true knowledge as opposed to delusion, produced by an evidence does not differ in its essential nature, whether one calls it eternal or transitory. Knowledge, though produced by an evidence, is nothing but knowledge. The knowledge preceded by memory, desire, etc., and supposed to be transitory, and that which is eternal and immutable, does not differ in their essential nature. just as the result of the transitory actions of standing, etc. The meanings of roots preceded by motion, etc., and that of the permanent ones not so preceded do not differ in their essential nature, and there are therefore the identical predicates in the statements people stand, mountains stand, etc. So the knower, though of the nature of eternal knowledge, is called a knower without contradiction, inasmuch as eternal knowledge is the same as one produced by an हि असंहत्य तक्षादीनहतस्वभावस्य च कार्यकरणोपादाने अनवस्था प्रसज्येत तक्षादीनां तु कार्यकरणैः नित्यमेव संहतत्वम् इति वास्यादुपादाने नानवस्था स्यादिति. Here the disciple starts an objection. It is not reasonable that the self, which is changeless and of the nature of eternal knowledge, and not in contact with the body and the senses, should be the agent of an action like carpenter in contact with an adze and other instruments. A regressus ad infinitum arises if the self unconnected with the body, the senses, etc., were to use them as its instruments, as carpenters and others are always connected with bodies and senses. There is no regressus ad infinitum when they use adhes, adhes and other instruments. इह तु असंहत स्वभावस्य करणानुपादाने कर्तृत्वं नोपपद्यते इति करणम् उपादेयं तदुपादानमपि विक्रियैवेति तत्कर्तृत्वे करणान्तरमुपादेयं तदुपादानेऽपि अन्यदिति प्रमातुः स्वातन्त्र्ये अनवस्था अपरिहार्या स्यात् इति. न च क्रियैव आत्मानं कारयति अनिवर्तितायाः स्वरूपाभावात् अथ अन्यत् आत्मानम् उपेत्य क्रियां कारयतीति चेत् न अन्यस्य स्वतःसिद्धत्वा विषयत्वाद्यनुपपत्तेः. न हि आत्मनः अन्यत् अचेतनं वस्तु स्वप्नमाणकं दृष्टं शब्दादि सर्वमेव अवगतिफलावसानप्रत्ययप्रमितं सिद्धं स्यात्. अवगतिश्चेदात्मनोऽन्यस्य स्यात् सोऽपि आत्मैव असंहतस्वार्थः स्यात् न परार्थः. न च देहेन्द्रियविषयाणां स्वार्थताम् अवगन्तुं शक्नुमः अवगत्यवसानप्रत्ययापेक्षसिद्धिदर्शनात्. Teacher gave the reply, agency is not possible without the use of instruments. Instruments therefore have to be assumed. The assumption of instruments is of course an action. In order to be the agent of this action, other instruments have to be assumed. In assuming these instruments, still others have to be assumed. A regressus ad infinitum is therefore inevitable if the self, which is not joined with anything, were to be the agent. The self is not really an agent but only apparently so. Nor can it be said that it is an action that makes the self act, as the Mimamsakas hold. For an action not performed has no existence. It is also not possible that something previously existing makes the self act as nothing except the self, can have an independent existence and be a non object. For things other than the self must be non conscious and therefore are not seen to be self existent. All things, including sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, etc., come to exist when they are proved by mental functions, resulting in the reflection of the self. 1. The Nayayikas hold that Ishwar is different from the individual soul. This view is refuted here. One apparently different from the self and possessed of consciousness must be no other than the self that is free from combination with other things and existing for itself only. Nor it is the position of the Charvakas. Can we admit that the body, the senses, and their objects exist for themselves inasmuch as they are seen to depend for their existence on mental modifications resulting in the reflection of the self. ननु देहस्यावगतौ न कश्चित् प्रत्यक्षादि प्रत्ययान्तरम् अपेक्षते. Disciple said, but no one depends on any other evidence such as sense perception etc. in knowing the body. बाढ़ं जागृति एवं स्यात् मृति सुषुप्त्योस्तु देहस्यापि प्रत्यक्षादि प्रमाणापेक्षैव सिद्धिः तथैव इन्द्रियाणां बाह्या एव हि शब्दादयो देहेन्द्रियाकारपरिणता इति प्रत्यक्षादि प्रमाणापेक्षैव हि सिद्धिः सिद्धिरिति च प्रमाणफलम् अवगतिम् अवोचाम सा च अवगति कूटस्था स्वयं सिद्धात्मज्योतिस्वरूपेति. Teacher said, yes, it is so in the waking state, but at death and in deep sleep, the body also depends on evidences such as sense perception etc. in order to be known. Similar is the case with the senses. It is the external sound and other objects that are transformed into the body and senses. The latter, therefore, also depend on evidences like sense perception etc. in order to be known. I have said that knowledge, according to the Charvakas, is an effect produced in the body, a combination of the elements like the effect of a chemical combination. I have said that a knowledge, the result produced by evidences, is the same as the self-evident, self-effulgent and changeless self. That is which I mean by knowledge. अत्राह चोदकः अवगतिः प्रमाणानां फलं कूटस्थनित्यात्मज्योतिस्वरूपेति न विप्रतिषिद्धम् इत्युक्तवन्तमाह न विप्रतिषिद्धम् कथं तर्हि अवगतेः फलत्वं कूटस्था नित्यापि सति प्रत्यक्षादि प्रत्ययान्ते लक्ष्यते तादर्थ्यात् प्रत्यक्षादि प्रत्ययस्य अनित्यत्वे अनित्येव भवति तेन प्रमाणानां फलम् इति उपचर्यते. The objector, the disciple says, it is contradictory to state that knowledge is the result of evidences and at the same time it is the self-effulgent self which is changeless and eternal. The reply given to him is this: it is not a contradiction. How then is knowledge a result? Answer: it is a result of a secondary sense. Though changeless and eternal, it is noticed in the presence of mental modifications called sense perception, etc., as they are instrumental in making it manifest. It appears to be transitory as mental modifications called sense perception, etc., are so. It is for this reason that it is called the result of proofs in a secondary sense. The same pure consciousness is thus called, in a secondary sense, a knower, an agent, or the result of proof. यद्येवं भगवन् कूटस्थनित्यावगतिः आत्मज्योतिस्वरूपैव स्वयं सिद्धा आत्मनि प्रमाणनिरपेक्षत्वात् ततो अन्यत् अचेतनं संहत्यकार्यत्वात् परार्थम् येन च सुखदुःखमोहप्रत्ययावगतिरूपेण पारार्थ्यं तेनैव स्वरूपेण अनात्मनः अस्तित्वं नान्येन रूपान्तरेण अतो नास्तित्वमेव परमार्थतः यथा हि लोके रज्जुसर्पमरिच्युदकादीनां तदवगतिव्यतिरेकेण अभावो दृष्टः एवं जाग्रत्स्वप्नद्वैतभावस्यापि तदवगतिव्यतिरेकेण अभावो युक्तः एवमेव परमार्थतः भगवन् अवगतेः आत्मज्योतिष नैर्यन्तर्यभावात् कूटस्थनित्यता अद्वैतभावश्च सर्वप्रत्ययभेदेषु अव्यभिचारात् प्रत्ययभेदास्तु अवगतिं व्यभिचरन्ति यथा स्वप्ने नीलपीताद्याकारभेदरूपा प्रत्ययाः तदवगतिं व्यभिचरन्तः परमार्थतो न सन्तीत्युच्यन्ते एवं जाग्रत्यपि नीलपीतादिप्रत्ययभेदाः तामेवावगतिं व्यभिचरन्तः असत्यरूपा भवितुमर्हन्ति तस्याश्चावगतेः अन्यः अवगन्ता नास्ति इति न स्वेन स्वरूपेण स्वयम् उपादातुं हातुं वा शक्यते अन्यस्य च अभावात्. Disciple asked, Sir, if this is so, independent of evidences regarding itself eternal and changeless knowledge, the consciousness of the self is purely self-evident, and all things different from it, and therefore non-conscious, have an existence only for the sake of the self, as they combine to act for one another in order to the events of the universe may continue uninterruptedly. It is only as the knowledge of the substratum of the mental modifications by which they are known illumine. So it is only as the knowledge of the mental modifications giving rise to pleasure, pain, and delusion that the not self serves the purpose of another, that is consciousness, the self. And it is as the same knowledge and nothing else that it has an existence. The non-self has no existence independent of knowledge, unlike that of Prakriti, the material cause of the universe spoken of in the Sankhya philosophy. So it does not really exist at all. Just as a rope snake, the water in a mirage, and such other things are found to be non-existent except only as the knowledge by which they are known. So the duality experienced during waking and dream has reasonably no existence except as the knowledge by which it is known. So having continuous existence, pure consciousness, the self, is eternal and immutable and never ceasing to exist, in any mental modifications. In all experiences such as jar consciousness, cloth consciousness, etc., consciousness persists and is therefore real, while jar, cloth, etc. do not persist and so are unreal. It is one without a second. The modifications themselves cease to exist, the self continuing to do so. Just as in dream, the mental modifications appearing to be blue, yellow, etc., are said to be really non existent as they cease to exist, while the knowledge by which they are known has an uninterrupted continuous existence. So, in the waking state, also they are reasonably really non existent as they cease to exist, while the very same knowledge continues to do so. As the knowledge has no other knower, it cannot be accepted or rejected by itself, the self, because it is self evident. As there is nothing else except myself, the aim of my life is fulfilled by your grace. तथैवेति एषा अविद्या यन्निमित्तः संसारो जाग्रत् स्वप्नलक्षणः तस्य अविद्यायाः विद्यानिवर्तिका इत्येवं त्वम् अभयं प्राप्तोऽसि नातः परं जाग्रत् स्वप्न दुःखमनुभविष्यसि संसार दुःखान् मुक्तोऽसि इति. Teacher said, it is exactly so. It is ignorance due to which the transmigratory evidence consisting of waking and dream is experienced. It is knowledge that brings this ignorance to an end. You have thus attained fearlessness. You will never again feel pain in waking or in dream. You are liberated from the misery of this transmigratory existence. Om iti. This word not translated indicates that the chapter is at an end. Disciple said, yes, sir. परिसंख्यान प्रकरणम चैप्टर 3 reiteration of reflection मुमुक्षूणाम उपात्तपुण्यापुण्य क्षपणपराणाम अपूर्वानुपचयार्थिनां परिसंख्यानमिदमुच्यते. अविद्याहेतवो दोषाः वाङ्मनःकायप्रवृत्तिहेतवः प्रवृत्तेश्च इष्टानिष्टमिश्रफलानि कर्माणि उपचयन्ते इति तन्मोक्षार्थम्. This method of repetition is described for those who aspire after supreme tranquility of the mind by destroying accumulated sins and virtues and refraining from accumulating new ones. Ignorance causes defects. Defects produces efforts on the body, mind and speech. And though these efforts are accumulated actions having desirable, undesirable and mixed results, this method is described here so that there may be a cessation of all these, desire and aversion. तथैवेति एषा अविद्या यन्निमित्तः संसारो cessation of all this. तत्र शब्दस्पर्श रूपरसगन्धानां विषयाणां श्रोत्रादिग्राह्यत्वात् स्वात्मनि परेषु वा विज्ञानाभावः तेषामेव परिणतानां यथा लोष्टादीनां श्रोत्रादिद्वारैश्च ज्ञायन्ते येन च ज्ञायन्ते स ज्ञातृत्वात् अतज्जातीयः ते हि शब्दादयः अन्योन्यसंसर्गित्वात् जन्म वृद्धि विपरिणामापक्षय नाश संयोगवियोगकारी क्षेत्रबीजाद्यनेककर्माणां सामान्येन च सुखदुःखाद्यनेककर्माणां तद्विज्ञातृत्वादेव तद्विज्ञाता सर्वशब्दादिधर्म विलक्षणः. As they are perceived by the ear and the other senses, the objects called sound, touch, sight, taste and smell have no knowledge of themselves or of other things transformed into the body and other things. They, like brickbats, are known to lack in the said knowledge. Moreover, they are known through the ear, etc., being the knower that by which they are known is quite of a different nature. For connected with one another, those sound and other objects are possessed of various properties such as birth, growth, change of condition, decline, death, contact, separation, appearance, disappearance, cause, effect and sex. All of them produce various effects like pleasure, pain and so on. The knower, that is the self of sound and the like, is of a nature different from theirs as it is the knower. तत्र शब्दादिभिः उपलभ्यमानैः पीड्यमानो विद्वान् एवं परिसञ्चक्षेत. शब्दस्तु ध्वनिसामान्यमात्रेण विशेषधर्मैर्वा षड्जादिभिः प्रियैः स्तुत्यादिभिः इष्टैः अनिष्टैश्च असत्य विभत्स परिभवा क्रोशादिभिर्वचनैः मां दृक्स्वभावम् असंसर्गिणम् अविक्रियम् अचलम् अनिधनम् अभयम् अत्यन्तसूक्ष्मम् अविषयं गोचरीकृत्य स्प्रष्टुं नैवार्हति असंसर्गित्वादेव माम्. अतएव न शब्दनिमित्ता हानि वृद्धिर्वा. अतो मां किं करिष्यति स्तुतिनिन्दादि प्रियत्वादिलक्षणशब्दः. अविवेकिनं हि शब्दम् आत्मत्वेन गतं प्रियः शब्दो वर्धयेत् अप्रियश्च क्षपयेत् अविवेकित्वात्. न तु मम विवेकिनो बालाग्रमात्रमपि कर्तुमुत्साहत इति. एवमेव स्पर्शसामान्येन तद्विशेषैश्च शीतोष्ण मृदु कर्कशादि ज्वरोदर शूलादि लक्षणैश्च अप्रियैः प्रियैश्च कैश्चित् शरीरसमवायिभिः बाह्यागन्तुकनिमित्तैश्च न मम काचित् विक्रिया वृद्धिहानिलक्षणा अस्पर्शत्वात् क्रियते. व्योम्न इव मुष्टिघातादिभिः तथा रूपसामान्येन तद्विशेषैश्च प्रियाप्रियैः स्त्रीव्यञ्जनादिलक्षणैः अरूपत्वात् न मम किञ्चन काचित् हानिः वृद्धिर्वा क्रियते. तथा रससामान्येन तद्विशेषैश्च प्रियाप्रियैः मधुराम्ललवणकटुतिक्तकषायैः मूढबुद्धिभिः परिगृहीतः अरसात्मकस्य मम न काचित् हानिः वृद्धिर्वा क्रियते. तथा गन्धसामान्येन तद्विशेषैः प्रियाप्रियैः पुष्पाद्यनुलेपनादिलक्षणैः अगन्धात्मकस्य न मम काचित् हानिः वृद्धिर्वा क्रियते. अशब्दमस्पर्शमरूपमव्ययं तथा रसं नित्यमगन्धवच्च यत् इति श्रुतेः. Distressed by sound and other things experienced, the knower of Brahman will thus practice repetition. Repetition. I, who am of the nature of consciousness, not attached to anything, changeless, immovable, imperishable, free from fear, extremely subtle, and not an object. Cannot, for the very fact of my being not attached, be made an object and touched by sound in general, or by its special forms such as the notes of the gamut, praise, etc., which are pleasant and desirable, and also false, terrible, insulting, and abusive words which are undesirable. So, there is no loss or gain due to sound. Therefore, what can sound, pleasant or unpleasant, consisting of praise or blame, do to me? Pleasant or unpleasant sound, regarded as belonging to the self, glorifies or injures an ignorant man on account of the indiscrimination, but it cannot do even the slightest good or evil to me who am a man of knowledge. These ideas should thus be repeated. Similarly, no change consisting of gain or loss can be produced in me by touch in general or by its special forms such as fever, colic pain, etc., coldness, hotness, softness, or roughness, which are unpleasant. Again, pleasant touches connected with the body are brought into existence by external and adventitious causes can likewise produce no change in me, inasmuch as I am beyond touch, like the ether, which when struck with one's fist does not meet with any change whatever. Likewise, I am entirely unconnected with sight, no good or harm is done to me by it either in its general form or in its special forms, pleasant or unpleasant, such as ugly sights. Similarly, independent of taste, I am not harmed or benefited by it either in its general form or in its special forms such as sweetness, sourness, saltiness, pungency, bitterness, and astringency, though accepted as pleasant or unpleasant by the ignorant. Thus, I, who do not consist of smell, cannot be harmed or benefited by it, either in its general form or in its special forms, such as flowers, fragrant pastes, etc., considered to be pleasant or unpleasant. For the Shruti says that I am one who am eternally devoid of sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. किंच य एव बाह्याः शब्दादयः ते शरीराकारेण संस्थिताः तद्ग्राहकैश्च श्रोत्राद्याकारैः अन्तःकरणद्वयता विषयकारेण च अन्योन्यसंसर्गित्वात् संहतत्वात् च सर्वक्रियासु तत्र एवं सति विदुषो मम न कश्चित् शत्रुः मित्रम् उदासीनो वा अस्ति तत्र यदि कश्चित् मिथ्याज्ञानाभिमानेन प्रियं वा अप्रियं वा प्रयुयुङ्क्षेत् क्रियाफललक्षणं तन्मृषैव प्रयुयुङ्क्षते सः तस्य अविषयत्वान् मम अव्यक्तोऽयमचिन्त्योऽयम् इति स्मृतेः तथा सर्वेषां पञ्चानामपि भूतानाम् अविकार्यः अविषयत्वात् अच्छेद्यो यमदाह्योऽयम् इति श्रुतेः। यापि शरीरेन्द्रियसंस्थानमात्रमुपलक्ष्य मद्भक्तानां विपरीतानां च क्रियाक्रियादिप्रयुयुंक्षा तज्जा च धर्माधर्मादिप्राप्तिः सा तेषामेव, न तु मयि अजरे अमृते अभये नयनं कृताकृते तपतः न कर्मणा वर्धते नो कनीयान् स बाह्याभ्यन्तरो यजः न लिप्यते लोकदुःखेन बाह्यः इत्यादि श्रुतिस्मृतिभ्यः। अनात्मवस्तुनश्च असत्वात् इति परमो हेतुः। आत्मनश्च अद्वयत्वविषयाणि द्वयस्यासत्वात् यानि सर्वाणि उपनिषद्वाक्यानि विस्तरशः समीक्षितव्यानीति। Moreover, sound and the other external objects transformed into the forms of the body, the ear and the other senses through which they are perceived are transformed into the forms of the two internal organs, the intellect and the body, are also into those of their objects, for they are connected and combined with one another in all actions. When this is so, I, who am a man of knowledge, have no one belonging to me as a friend or a foe, nor have I anyone indifferent belonging to me. Anybody, therefore, who wishes to connect me with pleasure and or pain, the results of his action, though a false egoism, makes a vain effort, for I am not within the reach of pain or pleasure, as the Shruti says, it is unmanifested and inscrutable. Similarly, I am not changeable by the action of any of the five elements, as I am not of an objective nature. Therefore, the Shruti says it cannot be cut or burnt. The merit or demerit arising out of good or evil done to this combination of the body and the senses on the part of those devotional or adverse to me will be theirs, but will not touch me, who am devoid of old age, death and fear, as the Shruti and Smritis say. It is not pained by omission or commission. It is not harmed or benefited by any action. Unborn, uncomprising the interior and exterior. It is beyond the pain felt by the people and unattached. The supreme reason why I am unattached is that nothing really exists except the self. As duality does not exist, the portions of the Upanishads regarding the oneness of the self should be studied to a great extent. The repetition of the last word in the text shows that the prose portion of the book is concluded. Here ends the prose portion of 1,000 teachings written by the all-knowing Adi Shankaracharya.